Now that we've exposed Black Lives Matter to be nothing more than a Marxist front willing to sell out their own people for political gain, we must also understand how cultural Marxism is the cultural branch of the global elites.
Never tell them who I am. Well, how dare I'm a man. 6 shooters in both my hands. I'm a cold-blooded brother, a real bad mother. Watch out, honey, here I am.
Welcome back to another episode of Revved Up. Now, normally I like to start each episode with some fun, snippy, quippy shit talk, but to be honest, the cold hard facts I'm revealing today will do more damage to the neo-Marxist cause than any ridicule I can come up with. As Black Lives Matter commandeers the spotlight, millions of people take to the streets, some in peaceful protest, some in violent vandal fashion, fighting to extend the lie that blacks are being gunned down by police at epidemic levels. Many, of course, are not in on the lie, and they truly believe that they're fighting against a legitimate, systemic miscarriage of justice. Others are all for the violence so long as it doesn't creep into their neighborhoods. People like ESPN writer Chris Palmer, who tweeted, "Burn that shit down! Burn it all down!" as rioters burned low-income housing to the ground. Of course, when the riots reached his own backyard, he sang an entirely different tune, tweeting, "They just attacked our sister community down the street. It's a gated community. They tried to climb the gates. They had to beat them back. They destroyed a Starbucks and are now in front of my building. Get these animals the F out of my neighborhood. Go back to where you live." To which the rest of the nation let out a resounding, "Burn that shit down! Burn it all down!" Because there's nothing America is more sick and tired of than ivory castle NIMBY nutbag elites who live by rules for thee, but not for me. Now, before we get going, I want to remind everyone to bang them buttons, like, share, subscribe, notification bell, and drop a comment. Let me know what you think of this video, and also let me know what else you'd like to hear me talk about. I need all the positive stats I can get because we all know it's voices like mine that are first to be taken out back and old yellered by the folks at Big Tech. Also, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and now Parlay at Thorburn. If you'd like to help make this show a little less janky, there are links to my Subscribestar, Patreon, and PayPal listed below. And if you like the jankiness of the show and you want to keep old Ram in the poorhouse, just go ahead and share this video. Now that the shameless plugs are out of the way, let's talk about Black Lives Matter and how neo-Marxist revolutionaries are wearing that phrase like a parasitic commie skin suit. Have you ever noticed how politicians like to use misnomers to obfuscate the true nature of a bill they're trying to pass? Like how the Patriot Act tries to instill a sense of pride in country, when really, it's all about letting your government spy on you. Or how the Respect for Marriage Act showed respect for marriage by totally redefining it and abolishing its age-old traditional meaning. Or the Fairness Doctrine, which in a pinnacle show of fairness, mandates private broadcasting companies fund the operating costs of public broadcast companies. And if they call the DREAM Act by its full name, the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act, people would be far more aware that it was about the funding of the dreams for foreigners at the expense of Americans. They apply these misnomers because it makes it much more difficult to voice opposition for something that sounds of pure intent. To the politically disengaged, how are you going to come off when you don't voice support for respect, fairness, and dreams? Such is the subversive linguistic subterfuge of Black Lives Matter. You can't voice opposition to them as an organization with their own radical political agenda without making it sound like black people don't matter to you. In an age where spouting virtue signals carries the same function as presenting your papers to the Gestapo, this dirty tactic of dishonest nomenclature becomes far more nefarious and infinitely more effective. One has to do little more than rub two critical thinking brain cells together to notice that all but a small handful of black lives fall outside the political scope of Black Lives Matter. Most of us are well aware that drug and gang violence in cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Baltimore have reached epidemic levels, as we can see from the FBI's 2018 Unified Crime Report. We can see in the murder stats here, we get down to race of victim, black or African American, 2,925. Race of offender, black or African American, 2,600, against only 234 killed by whites. So much for that racism problem we have. I take you now to the Black Lives Matter protest for the 2,600 blacks murdered at the hands of other blacks. Meanwhile, Planned Parenthood, another shining example of dishonest nomenclature, kills an average of 247 black babies every single day as they litter their Twitter feed with Black Lives Matter propaganda. Of course, their founder was Margaret Sanger, a virulent racist and eugenicist who sought the outright extermination of the black population. In a letter to Dr. Clarence J. Gamble, dated December 10, 1939, Sanger wrote, "There's only one thing that I would like to be in touch with, and that is the Negro Project of the South, which, if the execution of the details remain in Miss Rose's hands, my suggestions will not be confusing because she knows the way my mind works. The minister's work is also important, and also he should be trained, perhaps by the Federation, as to our ideals and the goal that we hope to reach. We do not want word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members." As disgusting as that is, you may well think to yourself, well, that was way back in 1939. Surely they're just providing women with much-needed health care today, right? Well, not so fast. To this day, Planned Parenthood holds Margaret Sanger in the highest esteem. Also, according to Life News, Planned Parenthood claims Black Lives Matter but kills 247 black babies and abortion every day. A startling 2016 study exposed that in New York City, more black babies are aborted than there are born. Similarly, in 2010, Planned Parenthood fell under scrutiny after a census suggested that the abortion giant was preying on black communities as 79% of their surgical abortion facilities were within walking distance of African American or Hispanic communities. All in all, Planned Parenthood is committing what amounts to genocide, killing off more than a quarter of the black population before they're even born. Imagine all those black lives that never were, all the hopes, dreams, achievements, accomplishments, ripped away from this earth limb by little limb before they could even gasp for air. I take you now to the Black Lives Matter Planned Parenthood protest. But for the small handful of unarmed blacks that are killed by police, which as we pointed out in part 1 is disproportionately less than whites, and actually only accounted for a total of 9 in 2019, we get At the end of the day, if Black Lives Matter is perfectly content to remain silent on the issues that actually amount to black genocide, but will burn the country to the ground over a very small handful of deaths, one can only conclude that Black Lives Matter is not about Black Lives Mattering at all. Even without the cultural Marxism angle, which I'm about to dissect for you, how do you justify giving power to an organization that claims to care about lives, but will turn an utter blind eye to the genocide of their own people, selling them out for the political expedience of a mere handful? Actually, that does sound like communism in a nutshell. Maybe the reason Black Lives Matter is so incensed by the phrase all lives matter is because they don't even believe all black lives matter. To Black Lives Matter, black lives only matter when taken to the hand of the police, because it is a trapdoor to the destruction of the rule of law and the dismantling of American society. In order to understand the organization's true intentions, you must first understand what cultural Marxism is. Now, I'm only going to give you a brief overview of cultural Marxism here because I'm going to take a more in-depth look at it and its effects on American life in the third and final part of this series. The concept of cultural Marxism began after World War I, when many European Marxists were disillusioned by the failure of communism to take root in Western European countries. It sprang from the prison writings of Antonio Gramsci, a lieutenant of Joseph Stalin and failed Italian communist revolutionary. After the Western European revolutions failed to uproot Western traditions, Gramsci came to realize, as he rotted in his jail cell, something that conservatives failed to figure out until the late great Andrew Breitbart, that politics is downstream of culture, meaning that where the culture goes, the politics will follow. He understood that in resilient cultures, communism can only be achieved through relentless attacks on the institutions of that culture. In the West, that means education, literature, art, film, religion, the Judeo-Christian worldview, marriage, the nuclear family. All of it has to go in the name of Marxism. The primary goal is to soften the culture's grip on their deeply rooted traditions, hollowing them out from the inside, weakening the culture as a primer for economic communism. Where the culture goes, the politics will follow. Of course, a century of worldwide communist experiments in the 20th century has proved communism to be little more than slavery, starvation, and human rights abuses sold to the public through propaganda and empty promises. It's a political bait and switch. Cultural Marxism is also the basis for political correctness, a decrepit strangulation of our most revered institution, free speech. By feigning moral superiority, cultural Marxists use political correctness as a tool to chisel away at our ability to speak our minds freely and openly in society. Presently, we are in the cancel phase of political correctness. It's where we get cancel culture from. But taken to its logical conclusion, we will next be looking at re-education camps and gulags for future dissidents. Don't believe me? The rhetoric is already happening. Just look at this Twitter tirade from verified blue checkmark, the Palmer Report. Conservatives cannot be teachers, police officers, doctors, lawyers, coaches, or bosses. It's constitutionally unfair to others who are subjected to the conservatives' deranged judgment. Conservatives can do menial work until they're ready to join the human race. We shouldn't be cold-hearted about this. A little late for that. But having a conservative as a police officer, for instance, isn't much different from having a KKK member as a police officer. It's just not something that civilized society can ever tolerate. So much for the tolerant left, right? We should rehabilitate any conservatives who are willing to try. We should pay for them to undergo therapy and retraining so they can understand the world around them. But first we must get them out of positions of influence because they're infringing on the rights of others. Somebody needs to get this golem a mirror. Jesus. So we've defined cultural Marxism. Now let's take a look at two Black Lives Matter websites and see if their true agenda really is about protecting the sanctity of black lives, or if that is just their propaganda front for cultural Marxist revolutionaries looking to uproot American traditions and values. From Movement for Black Lives. We are abolitionists. We believe that prisons, police, and all other institutions that inflict violence on black people must be abolished and replaced by institutions that value and affirm the flourishing of black lives. We believe in centering the experiences and leadership of the most marginalized black people, including but not limited to those who are trans and queer, women and femmes, and currently and formerly incarcerated, immigrants, disabled, working class, and poor. There you get all that intersectionality right there. We believe in transformation and a radical realignment of power. The current systems we live inside of, that's weird wording, need to be radically transformed, which includes a realignment of global power. We are creating a proactive, movement-based vision instead of a reactionary one. I have no idea what that even means. Could it be any more vague? We build kinship to one another. We draw from political lessons, grow in our leadership, and expanding our base to build a stronger movement. We are anti-capitalist. We believe and understand that black people will never achieve liberation under the current global racialized capitalist system. Marxist gobbledygook. Now, from blacklivesmatter.com. What we believe. Every day we recommit to healing ourselves and each other and co-creating alongside comrades, there's a Marxist term, allies, and family, a culture where each person feels seen, heard, and supported. We acknowledge, respect, and celebrate differences and commonalities. We work vigorously for freedom and justice for Black people, and by extension, all people. We intentionally build and nurture a beloved community that is bonded together through a beautiful struggle that is restorative, not depleting. We are unapologetically Black in our positioning and affirming that Black Lives Matter, we need not qualify our position. To love and desire freedom and justice for ourselves is a prerequisite for wanting the same for others. We see ourselves as part of the global Black family. There's no such thing. And we are aware of the different ways we are impacted or privileged as Black people who exist in different parts of the world. We are guided by the fact that all Black lives matter, except those killed by other Blacks and abortion doctors, regardless of actual or perceived sexual identity, gender expression, economic status, ability, disability, religious beliefs or disbeliefs, immigration status, or location. Here we go with that intersectionality again. We make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. We are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgendered privilege and uplift Black trans folk, especially Black trans women, who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. This stuff is hard to read. It's like a whole different language. We build a space that affirms Black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. Now it's feminism. We practice empathy. We engage comrades, there's that term again, with the intent to learn about and connect with their contexts. I don't know what any of this means. We make our spaces family-friendly and enable parents to fully participate with their children. We dismantle the patriarchal practice that requires mothers to work double shifts so that they can mother in private even as they participate in public justice work. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. We foster a queer-affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather, the belief that all in the world are heterosexual, unless she/he or they disclose otherwise. We cultivate an intergenerational and communal network free from ageism. We believe that all people, regardless of age, show up with the capacity to lead and learn. We embody and practice justice, liberation, and peace in our engagements with one another. What the fuck did any of that have to do with Black people? If that wasn't enough to convince you that Black Lives Matter is nothing more than a skin suit for cultural Marxists aiming to destroy America from the inside out, take a listen to Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors.
He was concerned, or is concerned, that there's a lack of perhaps ideological direction in Black Lives Matter that would allow it to fizzle out, as he said, in comparison to Occupy Wall Street.
I think that the criticism is helpful. I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
A trained Marxist, you don't say. Now that we've exposed Black Lives Matter to be nothing more than a Marxist front willing to sell out their own people for political gain, we must also understand how cultural Marxism is the cultural branch of the global elites. For that, we need to follow the money. So where does Black Lives Matter get their money from? Aside from private donations, which I'll address shortly, they get massive funding from prominent left-wing foundations. From the Washington Times, Black Lives Matter cashes in with $100 million from liberal foundations. The funding comes in addition to more than $33 million in grants to the Black Lives Matter movement from top Democratic Party donor George Soros through his Open Society foundations. It's funny how they mention George Soros as a top political donor, especially when you realize that Black Lives Matter somehow only becomes relevant before election seasons. I'm sure many of you are somewhat familiar with George Soros, the man also rumored to have funded the migrant caravans and Antifa, but let's take a closer look at who the man really is. A Hungarian-born hedge fund billionaire with the ethics of a rabid hyena, he is known as the man who broke the Bank of England, and he has outright admitted that the social consequences of his actions are of no concern to him. You can hear that from his own mouth in a 1998 interview he did with 60 Minutes.
I think that I've been blamed for everything. I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do.
Soros has stayed true to that mantra, having no moral quandaries, crashing entire regional economies, negatively impacting the lives of hundreds of millions of people for his own profit.
Right now, his Quantum Group hedge fund moves $14 billion of rich investors' money around the world every day, looking for profits and answering to no one. Soros makes huge bets on whole countries and economies. Last year, when he saw cracks in the Asia boom, he began selling the currency in Thailand. Traders in Hong Kong followed suit, triggering a financial crisis that plunged much of Asia into a depression.
In the last 2 years, you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Some have even suggested that Soros and others like him were intentionally trying to crash the U.S. economy during the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. From the Gateway Pundit. It has to be asked, are nefarious Soros-like short sellers trying to crash the U.S. economy? Wall Street short sellers are attacking the market to make a killing, tank the economy, and get Trump out of office. Trump must reinstate the uptick rule to stop this now. Recent data shows that Main Street investors have increased their buying of stocks during the current dramatic downturn. And yet the market is tanking. The Dow closed down today 9.9%. Where is all the selling pressure coming from? It is from short sellers who are using the coronavirus pandemic to attack the market in an attempt to steal a fortune from Main Street investors. Short sellers do not have to own the stock to sell it. They borrow the stock, sell it, and hope to make money by buying it back at a lower price. The short sellers are attacking the market by relentlessly borrowing more and more stock and selling it, overwhelming the Main Street buyers. This is how George Soros made a fortune by short selling the British pound. Considering that just a couple months before the pandemic, Soros was speculating on an American economic collapse, it is at least reasonable to question whether he was eyeing a massively profitable short sell of the American economy. Of course, Soros also has an ideological and political motivation to destroy the U.S. economy. When it comes to high-dollar political activists, no one in the world is more anti-American than George Soros. From the National Review. The truth about George Soros is damning enough. In 2006, Soros said that the main obstacle to a stable and just world is the United States. Not Iran, not Russia, not China, not Islamic terrorist groups, not transnational crime, the United States. In 2010, he declared that China is a better functioning government than the United States. So it comes as no surprise that an anti-American globalist who believes in a world without national borders, imagine how that would have played out during the coronavirus pandemic, is putting his money behind cultural Marxist agitators hell-bent on the destruction of America. After all, cultural Marxism is the cultural arm of the globalist agenda. And that's what quote-unquote useful idiots of Antifa and Black Lives Matter don't seem to understand. While they're stuck in World War II Germany playing a historical game of communists versus fascists, they're completely oblivious to how the communist goalposts have moved from defeating fascism to creating a globalist world order in which China is the model. Or maybe they do understand that, and that's why they speak so little of China, subverting our attention away from their true agenda. But it comes as no surprise that Democrats and their allies in the mainstream media and Hollywood are so gung-ho about Black Lives Matter when you have DNC political machine engineer Hillary Clinton heaping nothing but praise on George Soros.
We have been given an extraordinary blessing, and at this moment in time, our country needs us. And we need people like George Soros, who is fearless and willing to step up when it counts. So please join me in welcoming George Soros.
Now, this might be a bit of a tangent, but you simply can't mention George Soros without also pointing out that he, as a young Jewish man, was once a Nazi collaborator who grew up with no shame for the role he played in helping the Nazis confiscate property from Jews that were sent to concentration camps.
When the Nazis occupied Budapest in 1944, George Soros' father was a successful lawyer. He lived on an island in the Danube and liked to commute to work in a rowboat. But knowing there were problems ahead for the Jews, he decided to split his family up. He bought them forged papers, and he bribed a government official to take 14-year-old George Soros in and swear that he was his Christian godson. But survival carried a heavy price tag. While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews.
These are pictures from 1944 of what happened to George Soros's friends and neighbors.
You're a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust by posing as a Christian.
Right.
And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps.
Right. I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes, yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt.
No.
All in all, Soros is as despicable as they come. Now, of course, Soros is not the only source of funding for Black Lives Matter. They also get a lot of small money private donations from American citizens sympathetic to the supposed cause. But of course, whenever there are leftists and Democrats involved, there are more ethical questions to ask. This tweet from Jason Buttrill should raise some eyebrows. When you click to donate to Black Lives Matter, it takes you to Act Blue. If donated money goes unclaimed, Act Blue disperses the money however they want. It goes on to list their top expenditures, which includes $186 million to avowed Marxist and socialist Bernie Sanders and nearly $120 million to unofficial Democrat presidential nominee Joe Biden, as well as hundreds of millions of dollars to other various Democrat candidates. Now, this isn't to say that every dollar donated to Black Lives Matter is just going to fill the Democrat candidates' war chests, but in terms of transparency, it's about as clear as mud. So, hypothetically speaking, Black Lives Matter could easily serve as the perfect money laundering scheme for the DNC, a scheme that becomes less far-fetched when you see Marxist BLM co-founder Patrisse Cullors openly admitting that the real goal of Black Lives Matter is to get Trump out. From Breitbart. Black Lives Matter co-founder, our goal is to get Trump out. Appearing Friday on CNN's The Lead, Black Lives Matter Global Network co-founder Patrisse Cullors said President Donald Trump should resign from office immediately and said, "Our goal is to get Trump out." And while I can't definitively claim that Black Lives Matter donations are being laundered into Democrat war chests, the lack of transparency and accountability is definitively a problem and should raise some serious questions, especially amid new reports that, out of the blue, the Biden campaign has outraised the Trump campaign in the month of May for the first time ever, as Joe Biden remains in hiding. Considering the enthusiasm data for each candidate, this is an anomaly that has some serious question marks attached to it. To this point, I've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that not only is Black Lives Matter predicated on the false premise of systemic racism, they are also not who they say they are, and their true agenda comports much more with nefarious Marxist plots funded by globalist actors. Stay tuned for the third and final segment of my Black Lives Matter series as I take a deeper dive into cultural Marxism, the effects it's already had on our nation, and what America would look like if the cultural Marxists take total control. We are already on the precipice of losing our nation to this sordid ideology. You may hate Trump for all of his faults and flaws, but the alternative staring us in the face come November will make Trump look like Gandhi by comparison. Now, Biden is no Marxist, but he certainly does not have the will to stand up to Marxist agitators. Marxism operates through subversion. It's a political bait and switch that ultimately enslaves the masses under the select few in power. The 2020 election represents an existential fork in the road for America. Will we succumb to the Marxist globalist plot, or fight to maintain our rights as free Americans? I just hope we aren't too late. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please remember to like, share, comment, subscribe. I'm going to try to put out 1 or 2 of these videos a week, but I do work a full-time job, so if you're interested in seeing more frequent content, please consider contributing to my Subscribestar, Patreon, or PayPal accounts listed below, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Thorburn. And as always, rev your engines, ride hard, and fight like hell.
Every time who I am, well, how dare I'm a man.